Hi, my name's Heather South. I'm the lead archivist at the Western Regional Archives, and today I'm bringing you a small history lesson about the Reconstruction Aid nurses here in Oteen, North Carolina. So I work in Asheville at the Western Regional Archives. We are a branch of the state archives, and we did a whole series of Lunch and Learn talks for Women's History Month. And unfortunately, I had technical issues. My talents with that, no bounds. And so hopefully this recording will go off smoothly today. And I appreciate you listening in, and hopefully you'll learn a few things or something new about Reconstruction and Reconstruction aids. So I'm in Asheville, North Carolina, in a building that is called the Western Office. And so our services, we have a lot of different services in the building, including archaeology, State Historic Preservation Office, records management, Land and Water Conservancy. And of course, I might be biased, but I think the best department is the archives. Shh, don't tell the others. The archives is opened about 9 years ago. We serve the western part of the state, and our building is actually a former nurses dormitory for the VA hospital. So that's sort of how we got into this whole idea of researching the VA hospital. And so let me turn over to my PowerPoint, and hopefully be able to share with you a lot about the Reconstruction aids and Oteen, North Carolina. So the talk today is Healing Mind, Body, and Soul, the Reconstruction aids at Oteen, North Carolina. And as I mentioned, our building, the Western Office, is a former nurses dormitory for the VA hospital. The postcard here on the left is actually the two nurses dormitories. They were built in the early 30s. And this is building 9, which is now the Hope and Recovery Center for the VA hospital. And then our building here, number 13, tucked into the trees. And here we are, modern day. They just finished a rehab of the structure next door. It was a good sort of stark contrast of preservation. And so we're very glad that they did that, and they're back to matching sisters. So the archives is actually, we occupy the entire 3rd floor of the building, and we're located off of Ricefield Road. Right now, the archives has been closed due to the pandemic, but we are reopening for patrons by appointment only. If you want to know more, find us on the website. Feel free to email me. My email address is heather.south@ncdcr.gov. So this area of Asheville is called Oteen. So what is Oteen? Oteen was a term used by Commander Hoagland. Colonel Hoagland is the first commander of the Oteen, or General Hospital No.19 at the time. This area was Azalea, North Carolina. There was a post office and a train stop. But once the US General Hospital was built, Hoagland started using the term Oteen, and it was apparently a Native American word meaning chief aim. We have not been able to definitely confirm that that meaning or that word, but in his eyes, that's what it meant. And the chief aim of the hospital was to heal the patients. And so he actually wrote an article about the treatment of tuberculosis in Army hospitals for a medical journal in 1919. And using what he said was this Native American word of Oteen, he effectively renamed the facility. And with those kinds of articles, that Oteen became what it is known as. And here, even a century later, the area is still called Oteen. There is West Asheville, and it's not called East Asheville, it's called Oteen. And so the hospital was no longer the hospital at Azalea, it is now the hospital at Oteen. And no matter that it's now currently the Charles George VA Medical Center or the Asheville VA Medical Center, it's still Oteen Hospital. So no matter how many name changes it's had, Oteen stuck, and we can thank Colonel Hoagland for that. In the first issue of the Oteen magazine, which was sort of a newsletter on site here, November of 1918, Hoagland wrote sort of an editorial about the spirit of Oteen, and he elaborates about this chief aim. Quote, Our chief aim, broadly stated, should be giving of our best for the honor and services of our country. To this end, General Hospital No.19 specifically has as its chief aim the return to the battle of life in full strength and vigor of those committed to its care. We are all soldiers in a common cause, clothed in the uniform of our government. May we honor both the cause and the uniform. And may the spirit of Oteen, expressed by hearty cooperation, make every day count for success towards our chief aim. So from the very beginning, the hospital is aimed at returning patients to the best health possible, and the reconstruction unit is a major part of achieving that goal. So I kept seeing Reconstruction Department pop up. Of course, we're located in this historic building, and in such a historic setting, we started doing research on Oteen, what was going on and what was happening. And so this reconstruction work, Reconstruction Department, Reconstruction Aides started popping up, and these articles appeared. And I'd never really heard that term during this time period. Normally, with history, Reconstruction is typically after the Civil War, the Reconstruction era. And then, okay, well, I've heard reconstructive surgery, so that's plastic surgery. Was this about artificial limbs for patients? But no, here's an article where they're asking for wool and silk scraps for the boys. So what does that mean? So that meant I had to dig a little further, and what started as a very small line of inquiry turned into and has now blossomed into a huge field of research for me that I'm always trying to dabble in my spare time and find out more. So what is reconstruction? Reconstruction is more of what we think of today as physical and occupational therapy. These are modern day fields that were born out of World War I. European countries had started utilizing reconstruction as a means to conserve manpower during the war. They had been in the war a lot longer, and so they were trying to get men back to the front because they're running out of people. The programs were aimed at not just returning them to the front, but also if they weren't able to go or return back to their military service, then to give them the best civilian life possible. So giving them skills to work with and make a living, and basically to help them realize the most functionality that they could with their injury. The US saw a potential of such a program for its own military, and by August of 1917, the Surgeon General established the Division of Special Hospitals and Physical Reconstruction. According to Army historian Colonel Emma Vogel, the physical reconstruction was defined as maximum mental and physical restoration of the individual achieved by the use of medicine and surgery, supplemented by physical therapy, occupational therapy, or curative workshops, activities, education, recreation, and vocational training. Physical therapy was described as consisting of hydrotherapy, electrotherapy, and mechanotherapy. Active exercise, indoor and outdoor games, and massage. So that's a whole lot of things. So now that we have sort of a better idea of what reconstruction meant, I started digging a little bit further into the types of therapies and the types of things that were being offered literally in our own backyard. So who were the Reconstruction Aides? Reconstruction Aides were actually the civilian women who served in at the end of World War I and well after World War I. Their role was to provide treatments of both physical and emotional wounds to help the servicemen and servicewomen recover. Very few were actually trained therapists like they are today. Instead, they were artisans and craft persons and teachers. They were women helping the healing process, but were not nurses per se. So sort of nursing adjacent, if you will. I had heard plenty about World War I nurses and, the Red Cross nurses, but never really had heard anything about the Reconstruction Aides. So I became sort of fascinated to learn more and about what types of things they were doing here at Oteen. The particular reconstruction aide that you see in the photos here is Margaret Wheeler Robinson. Now, Margaret actually trained in woodworking, metalsmithing, and other arts. She actually went to a course in New York to learn about this sort of therapies and to be a reconstruction aide. And I believe, I haven't found the exact date that she ends up at Oteen, but I think it has to be in spring of 1920. But you can see from this newspaper article in Meridian, Connecticut, which is where she's from, that she had graduated from her New York class, and now she was being stationed in hospital, US General Hospital No.16 in New Haven. And then she eventually ends up at Fort McHenry, and then again, she ends up at Oteen in 1920. Here she met William Waldo Dodge, who was a second lieutenant. He had received several wounds during his service and had chlorine gas poisoning. So he was sent to Oteen for his recovery. And what happens here at Oteen, because of the mountain air, anything that's lung issue, tuberculosis, mustard gas exposure, chlorine gas, all of that ends up being treated with fresh air. And so the mountains here become crucial for that. And Oteen becomes the largest facility for treatment. And so Dodge is sent here, even though he's not from here. He's sent here for his recovery. He starts learning silversmithing and metalworking from Margaret. And not only is he gaining skills, he also makes a love connection with Margaret. And the two of them actually married in 1921. He opened up a shop here called Asheville Silvercraft, and they specialized in larger pieces, a lot of flatware, platters, bowls, trophies, those kinds of things. And so Margaret and William Waldo Dodge both worked on the silversmithing side of things. The Dodge collection that we received here at the Western Regional Archives a few years ago ends up having a lot of information about their work, but it also has some wonderful images and information from Margaret's time as a Reconstruction aide here. And with those photos, it really helps give us more insight into what life was like here for them. This is probably one of my favorite photos from the Johnson collection, from the Margaret Robinson collection. Anna Johnson, who's in the photo here, it's captioned that that's her name. I've not been able to turn up much about her. She's proven elusive so far in my research, but I haven't given up. I love this photo because it really shows the interaction and the closeness between the Reconstruction aides and their patients. It also shows the portability of the work. The idea was that most of these individuals were bedbound, they weren't ambulatory, they weren't able to go across the campus to a building. They were having to do things either in their beds or close to their wards. And so here, this is a porch that's sort of on the end of one of the wards. And so the guys would have been just been able to walk out there or wheeled out in the case of the second gentleman. The guy on the far left, unfortunately, I don't know any of their names. I'm hoping that maybe someday we'll be able to put names with faces, but for right now, they're just unknown patients here at Oteen. But the gentleman on the left definitely has some sort of hand loom that he's working on, I think. It looks like it's made out of a shoebox. The gentleman on the far right has a table loom. It's more built, it looks like it's wooden. And then the gentleman, of course, in the wheelchair there has a ball of yarn. So I don't know if he's rolling it or if he's starting a knitting project, but definitely going on, a lot going on here. And the idea was that this was not just about, giving them skills. It was about filling time too, and also, sometimes we need that distraction. If you are in bed or you're at the hospital months on end, and in some cases years on end, then you're going to want to have something to do with your time and want a little distraction. So being able to make something or focus on a particular task or craft or weaving or whatever it may be, it allowed them a little bit of a distraction and a little escape from their condition. This photo shows a Christmas party being hosted for the patients by the Reconstruction aides. And again, this is one of the porches there on the barracks. And so the Reconstruction aides were teaching classes and giving skills training and those kinds of things, but they also were spreading cheer with smiling faces and kind gestures by hosting a tea party or hosting a Christmas party, just helping boost morale in general. The caption on this photo gave me some new clues for my research. Margaret is here with her fellow Reconstruction aides outside of their barracks with their supervisor, Miss Barringer. That's what the caption said. So now I had a new name to work with, Barringer. I'm not sure which one of these is Margaret. I think this might be her, one of these two ladies. I'm not quite sure. But now I know that I need to look for Miss Barringer as a Reconstruction Aid supervisor. In my family, we call it historical spelunking. So it really is amazing what you can discover if you start digging a little bit deeper on some of these individuals. And by the way, the barracks that they're standing in front of is really just about 100 yards from where I'm sitting today. It is literally just right outside of our door. And it's kind of neat to see that even 100 years later, the barracks and the nurses' dorms are still operating, just in different purposes, but they didn't stray too far. So Anna Barringer is actually Anna Marie Barringer. She would have been in her early 30s when she comes to Oteen. She's born in Charlotte, North Carolina, and her dad is Dr. Paul Barringer, who practiced medicine there until he eventually opens up a small preparatory medical school at Davidson College. Eventually, he's faculty at Virginia Tech and then at the University of Virginia. And UVA is where I found a collection of his papers in their archives. And it includes a manuscript of his biography written by Anna, his daughter, and it also has her diplomas. So she actually has a diploma from 1914 from Columbia University in Fine Arts and Teaching. Now, with that clue, I could add her education to the search framework and was able to learn that she was actually teaching in Mississippi before coming to Oteen to work. She was the head of the art department for the Industrial Institute and College in Columbus, Mississippi. She was, according to the newspaper articles that I found, she was given a leave of absence to go study in New York. So she was able to leave her teaching position to go study at Columbia University from 1912 to 1914. She returns to Columbus, Mississippi, and is teaching and head of the art department there until she's granted a leave of absence in 1918 for, quote, the service. And her first post in the service is going to be here at Azalea or Oteen, North Carolina for the hospital here. And not only is Anna just assigned here, she's actually the first chief reconstruction aide for the hospital. There is an Atlanta Constitution article in February of 1919 that goes, it's a huge article all about the hospital. But that's where that Anna photo comes from. And it also has a whole section on Miss Barringer's work. And it's talking about beads and making of clay heads and dolls and knitting projects for the patients and the work that they're doing. I think probably my favorite quote is that one of the reconstruction aides said, "Someday I'm going to go out and kill a cow to get a big piece of leather." So leather working was taught here. So they definitely would have been interested in a cowhide, I suppose. But so she's sort of putting out an all call about that they need supplies. And most of all, they needed wool for knitting because the guys had really fallen in love with and in favor of these sleeping caps or these skating caps. The article says that they were gray or khaki with a touch of color on the band, and that they really helped with the chilly nights here in the North Carolina mountains. And now if we go back to that previous photo that we looked at before, we can see, I think that's probably one of those caps that she's describing. So you can imagine these, if you're out in the cold, it's going to get a nice warm knit cap would be lovely. And it wouldn't it be great if you can make your own, make ones for friends, or make them to send home as well. So I think that's definitely one of those caps that she's referring to. So what else did the Reconstruction aides do? I think the better question is, what didn't they do? In a November 1918 article in the Asheville Citizen Times, it details a great deal of the work that was being done by the Reconstruction Unit, saying that more than 400 young men who fell in Europe have enrolled in various classes of this important work. It goes on to describe the atmosphere of the Reconstruction Unit, saying that the attitudes were very optimistic and that, quote, there's an air of confidence that pervades the place. So it definitely helps raise the spirits. And from newspaper articles like this one, we start to see the types of classes and the types of things being offered, and really just how diverse and how big the Reconstruction Unit was for the treatment work here at Oteen. This is just a sampling of the courses and classes that I've been uncovering, just about everything. They were teaching architectural drawing to gas engine theory, photography, even beekeeping. There were 12 apiaries on the campus. You've got to remember there's about 400 acres here at Oteen, so they had room to have agricultural and landscaping classes, and had room for that if they were able. I think the most shocking thing that I've found so far is the animal and chicken husbandry. But if you're going to return to farming life, learning those kinds of skills while you're a patient is a bonus, right? So just learning how to raise chickens while you're a patient. I wonder if that's covered by my insurance. I'm not sure. So the Reconstruction aides were teaching, they're mentoring, they're caring, they're helping heal in just a multitude of ways. Another collection that's been a great help for us to gain some insight is the Mrs. Walter L. Massey collection of Jesse Morris photographs at the University of North Carolina in Asheville. I'm not exactly sure how Mrs. Massey knew Jesse or how she's connected, but this 1920s era scrapbook is 68 pages of almost 300 photographs that depict life at Oteen, and really give us a remarkable look at what it was like for the Reconstruction aides and patients. And these photos, I look at them quite frequently because I see something new every time I look at them. The photo there on the left is Sergeant Rutherford in bed. Obviously, he is a bedridden patient, but if we look closely, we start to see that there's this round sort of loom shaped item next to his bed. And then another photo in the collection here, these two ladies. These ladies are actually from the Highland Guild, and they are coming here to teach basket weaving and wreath making. And notice what she has in her hand. It's one of these round looms. So it's definitely really lots of context clues within these photographs that tell us what was going on. I also like that there's a knitted cap here to the left of him. So he obviously is partaking in whatever workshops are being offered. And I love that local women were getting involved, so that the Highland Craft Guild folks were coming and teaching these highly artistic and craft skills. The typing class here on the right is a typical classroom setting, and there's not, it's a typical classroom. But what is remarkable about this is that this is a circa 1920. The classes are integrated. So you have African-American patient along with the white patients, and there's also a single woman who is a patient. Nurses would have been exposed to mustard gas and issues while they were serving overseas. So there's, of course, a whole wing of nurses here who aren't caring for people. They are their patients themselves. And I would imagine they probably aren't the best patients because they're probably frustrated because they want to help everybody. I would say one of the most interesting things, or at least sort of unique things that I've uncovered in terms of the Reconstruction Department, is that they played games, they were dealing out cards, they sang songs, they joked, they sat by bedsides for comfort, they helped writing letters home, they changed the record on the Victrola, and so much more. But here's a great example of how their work was sort of changing lives as well. They were teaching English to foreign-born patients. And then in this article in 1919, we see that 18 were actually naturalized here. So not only is the Reconstruction Department helping stave off boredom and boost morale, but they're changing their lives. I mean, it's sort of remarkable to me to think that they are teaching English. And of course, the article from the Oteen on the left says that the foreign-born patients already knew their own languages, so they're learning English and picking up the language here fairly easy, but that they were also teaching these same reading and writing basics to people who are illiterate before. So you can think of, I went into the Army and I don't really have much. I come back, I'm in the hospital, and they're teaching you to read and write things that you couldn't even do before, and how much that will change your life after you leave. What to me is also interesting is what a cultural melting pot Oteen must have been. Not only are the reconstruction aides being sent here from all over the country, the patients are from all over the country and obviously from other countries. So these 18 soldiers who were naturalized, there's Russia, there's Ireland, there's Turkey, there's Romania. I mean, this idea is that there's so many people. It's this cultural melting pot happening in the wards here. And so, you know, you can't help but kind of understand that maybe in a time when things weren't so great and people were more xenophobic and afraid, that this was maybe a great opportunity for sharing different cultures and different information. And of course, learning English is always a great way to share and communicate better and more effectively with each other. So there's other Oteen collections here. And we have a number of things that lend themselves. We actively are looking all the time for new Oteen information. One of the more modern collections that we have are the Hennon letters. Corporal Russell Hennon was in the Army. He was during World War II. In 1943, he sustained an unspecified injury. We can't quite figure out what happened to him, but he ended up with an infection which necessitated him to be in the hospital for some length of time. And so he ends up being transferred here to Oteen. He's writing letters, and most of the letters are from his girlfriend, then girlfriend, later wife, Mary Madeline Tabbitt, to Russell. But sometimes there are some from him. But even in all of them, there's 73 letters in the collections, and there's a lot of mushy things. There's nicknames, there's tons of I love yous and X's and O's. But if you can kind of look in between all of that mushy stuff, there's some great insights into what Russell was doing while a patient here. He's making rugs. He's sending her rugs, and she's, oh, I love the rugs. They match the room. She's gushing about his rugs. He's doing screen printing. He's taking and drawing on handkerchiefs and sending them to her. So he's doing a lot of things here at Oteen, and so it gives us insight into what life was like for a patient, but also lets us know that those reconstruction classes and opportunities are still being offered even into the 40s. The Ruiz-Brown family collection is just chock full of Oteen snippets. Mr. Ruiz, who's 92, kept everything from his family and is constantly bringing us new material, which is wonderful. The Brown family farm was actually part of the land that the US government bought to build the hospital on. So from the beginning, his family has been involved with Oteen. His mom and aunts worked at Oteen. He worked at Oteen, and several other family members also worked at the hospital over the years. His Aunt Annie was definitely a Reconstruction aide, and after she married and left her hospital work, she and her husband, who was also a former patient, ran the Oteen Cafe across the street from the hospital and used their home as sort of a boarding house for the wives and children who came to visit their soldiers in the hospital. And because of her connection to the patients in their family, she actually acquired several pieces of patient art. And we have 2 pieces of them here in our collections. And so I'll share those with you at the end of the talk today. So this is Florence Standish. She is the first chief nurse here at Oteen. She has a fascinating story all her own, but that's a talk for a different day. In a March 1919 article for the Oteen magazine, she wrote a glowing report about the importance of the Reconstruction aides, calling them the allies of the Army Nurse Corps. She said that in the beginning, the trained nurses sort of looked down at the Reconstruction aides and kind of looked at them rather snobbishly and erroneously. But she said that, you know, they wondered what could these women bring to the table, but that after seeing them in action for several months, they realized that they were in the wrong. And that, quote, "We of the nursing profession find these thoroughly equipped women are true allies, doing for the patient what, because of the very nature of military service, we could not do. Moreover, doing for the patient what we ordinarily are not equipped to do." So by the very nature of their jobs, the nurses were tending to the medical side of things, and this sort of the caring aspect and taking the time to throw a tea party was not something that a nurse could do to help boost morale, but it was definitely something the Reconstruction aides could do, and the nurses ended up depending on them. So it's, you know, we hear a lot about the nurses, but really these Reconstruction aides were playing just as vital a role. And by the way, the Oteen magazine that you've heard me quote from quite a bit today was actually a product of the Reconstruction Unit. With the help of the Reconstruction Aides, patients wrote, edited, and published several newsletters, and published it all here on Post. So that's to me is just so awesome that the topic that I'm interested in, they did a newsletter. And so and it's chock full of information. So it's a win-win. That's not always happening in archival research. So I call that archives magic, when everything aligns. So by the 1920s, there are 100 Reconstruction aides assisting here at Oteen. And by the 1930s, the department is really no longer being called. It's being phased out. They don't call it the Reconstruction Unit. They're starting to call it the Rehabilitation Unit, or they're calling it occupational therapy. And the civilian aides who had been helping are now being phased into more volunteer roles and not official government service workers. So no matter, what it's called, though, that the work that was being done then, 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, it carries on and it continues. Even today, there are classes with art therapy, writing groups, and crafts at the VA hospital. So all of that, occupational therapy, the reconstruction work, the art therapies, all of that was born out of the efforts in World War I, made by, as a patient here at Oteen, Sergeant Patterson called them the ladies in blue and white. So the Reconstruction Aides, even though it's not something we hear about often, it was definitely a trail blazed by women. And I hope that I've given you a little bit of insight into the world of the Reconstruction Aides. The women in blue and white definitely uplifted and built back the men and women in their care. But more importantly, it helped them heal mind, body, and soul. So let me stop sharing my PowerPoint real quickly. And now I want to show you a couple of those art pieces that I mentioned. So Miss Annie Brown Nicely, she ends up with a couple of patient pieces that Mr. Ruiz has brought to us. And this is a lovely painting of some roses, the bouquet of flowers. And then she also ends up with a very cool landscape painting that's on a board. And it actually is an oil painting. So, normally we don't collect art pieces, but because this was a piece of patient art, we felt it important to keep it with the collection, because this gives us a little show and tell, if you will, for the Oteen and the reconstruction services that were going on. The other piece that we have is from our Asheville VA Medical Center collection. There was a cabinet over at the VA in their library, and it was just full of things. And this was actually just discovered in a cupboard that was being cleaned out over in their nursing home department in their CLC, their community living center. And this is a tray. It's got the name and date on the back by B.H. Riddle, 1919, Oteen. So this would have been probably woven and painted by a patient here, Mr. Riddle, in 1919. So this is 100 years old, which is crazy to me. And what's even crazier is that it was shoved in the back of a cupboard. All these years later, it was still over at Oteen. How it made it back there, I don't know, but it's kind of remarkable. The other piece that I have is a more modern piece. This is from the 1950s, and I borrowed this from the Swannanoa Valley Museum in Black Mountain. And this is a chess set that was hand carved and handmade by a patient, and it's just so intricate in the detail. He even made the box. And this just came to them from the Jacobs family. Dr. Jacobs worked here. He had a nurse that was training with him. She lived in the dorms here in the 1960s and was training with Dr. Jacobs, and he was like, man, I wish you could meet my son. And about 3 days before she was set to leave, he set up a dinner and set up his son with her, and they ended up marrying. And she was a nurse here in Asheville through the end of the 1980s, the family moved to Florida and they called us recently. And so she sent me photos, she sent me documents, and then she also sent them this handmade chess set. So that to me is just remarkable. You just never know where things are going to pop up. So I hope that, again, that some of this has given you some great insight into the Reconstruction Aides and a little bit of the Oteen history. As you can tell, I really love it. I'm very fascinated by it. We're constantly learning more. And someday I will know who Anna Johnson really was. I've not forgot about her. But please do contact me if you have any information or any questions. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to share what we know, and we love to learn where other resources might be. So again, thank you so much for attending today's session, and I look forward to hopefully seeing you at the Western Regional Archive soon. Thank you so much.